Hey, Facebook. So I totally look like I'm looking off screen here, and I kind of am because I'm going to be looking at notes this time and trying to follow along so that I can make sure that I'm not missing anything and I have those notes on my computer. So if I'm looking away, that's why. I'm still going to try to catch any comments that are in the box. So if you have you ever needed to bring something up to your spouse, something that's difficult to talk about, something that might actually even cause your spouse to get upset or to get hurt or to get angry, but you know that you really do need to bring this up anyways? Well, so today's Facebook Live is for you. So I'm Dr. Jessica McLeese. I am a licensed clinical psychologist and a certified sex therapist, also a certified sexual educator, and I own a company called Fully Well, and I host this group that you're watching from right now. And so I talk about marriage and intimacy quite frequently because I enjoy it and because I think Christians need to have strong, committed marriages and awesome sex lives. So that's what I do here. So today I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking to you about how you can have a tough or a difficult conversation with your spouse without upsetting them or hurting their feelings. And even if you've done that in the past and the conversation hasn't been so great, this is going to give you some tips for making that conversation go better. Now, we all have things that come up at times, or at least if you're married for very long, we have things that come up that we know we need to bring to our spouse. It may be something that's happening inside of the marriage. It may be some kind of aggravation or annoyance that's going on that you want to talk about and that you want to try to improve. That's what this Facebook Live is about today. Before we start, I'm going to ask 3 questions, and I want you to just note yes or no. Is this something you've dealt with or you're dealing with now? So question number 1, this is just yes or no in your head. You don't have to put it inside of the contact or the comment box or anything like that. But have you ever thought deeply about how to have a tough conversation with your spouse, and you even decided on the right words to say? You've played it over in your mind a few times, but instead of actually having that conversation, you let little distractions come and get in the way and keep you from actually moving forward with that conversation? Yes or no? Remember, you don't have to put it in comment box. Or have you ever started a difficult conversation with your spouse and you really expect it to go well, but somehow, and you don't even know how, it went downhill, things got stressful, things got tense, and you somehow didn't communicate well? Or have you ever held on to something that's bothering you for so long that you end up getting angry at yourself for not talking about it, so frustrated that you finally just yell and let it all spill out? Or you've just resigned yourself to let it go and not talk about it because you don't want the conflict that comes? Well, so that's what I'm talking about today. So stay on board with me as we go through this. So let's start with why sometimes communication does not go as well as you're expecting. It does not go as well as you want it to. So we got to know the problems that can occur so we can make sure that those don't happen. So John Gottman is a marriage therapist. He's been doing marriage work for several decades, and he's watched several couples until he's learned these key things that can happen that can cause pain in the relationship. So much so that he actually has about an 80% success rate of knowing if a couple is actually going to stay married or not. And he knows this by watching their interactions together. So he warns us against something called the harsh startup. Now, a harsh startup is when you're bringing a conversation to your spouse and you know you need to talk to them, but it begins with a criticism or a critique. For instance, let's say that you would like your spouse to help out more around the house. Well, a harsh startup would be throwing a dish in the sink and saying, "I'm so sick of this. Why don't you ever get any chores done?" Obviously not helpful, right? A harsh startup is any kind of critique or criticism that you're putting on your spouse without just saying, "Look, we've got a concern and an issue that we need to talk about." Now, it isn't just John Gottman that knows this is an issue. Scripturally speaking, we know this is an issue as well. So Proverbs 15:1 says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger." So if you've ever had a conversation with somebody and things are fairly quiet in the room around you, you actually can talk at a hushed tone and speak to one another quietly. If you've ever spoken to someone quietly like that, you know that you just naturally come closer to one another. You kind of lean in, you put your ears closer to the other person's mouth so that you can take in all of that information. But if you have a harsh startup or your words are painful or loud or angry, you're going to find that you can't have that closeness during the conversation. And it's not just the physical act of a closeness in the conversation. That's actually happening in your relationship as well. So if you're able to connect in a way that's soft and kind and gentle, that flows throughout the relationship, where the relationship itself gets more connecting. And in the same way, if there's harshness in that startup, or there's an automatic critique when you bring something to your spouse, you're going to find that that's disconnecting in the entire relationship, not just in that conversation. These things have a tendency to flow out and continue to impact us. So no harsh startups. That'll cause communication to go badly. The second one is when we have out of control emotions. Now, I've talked a little bit before about how we have these emotional centers in our brain. Men and women both have them. Women do have larger emotional centers, but even so, we all have these emotional centers in our brain. And your brain is either going to have these negative emotions that are showing forth and coming out, like fear and pain and anger, or it's going to have more peaceful, comforting emotions and emotions that make you connect with one another. You literally cannot have both of those going on at the same time. So you cannot have an emotion going on that says, I am connecting with you, I'm feeling loved by you, I'm feeling peaceful with you, and at the same time have an emotion that says, you are dangerous, you are not safe to talk to, I need to distance myself from you. So we need to make sure that when we're having conversations, that we're aware of the emotion that we're bringing to it. So if you're sitting in a place of fear and pain, and that might be about a situation that's going on in your marriage, or it might be a situation in regards to how you're feeling about your spouse, that's going to cause you to have a fight or flight response. Let me give you a couple of examples. So if you're having difficulty with a situation, let's say maybe your spouse has been working late for several weeks and you're getting really frustrated that you guys aren't spending any time together. Now, if you come at that feeling like maybe there's fear present, so you come at that thinking my spouse is doing something they're not supposed to, and now they're not coming home, and now I'm upset, you can kind of get into this cycle where then you react in such a way that you have to react when you're afraid. So when we're afraid, let's say a saber-toothed tiger is running after you and attacking you because you're living back in the caveman days. The idea is you would have to run or you would have to fight. Like, this is adaptive. Our bodies work this way. Same way if you're out shopping late at night and you see someone following closely behind you. You're supposed to either fight that person or run away, depending on what the need is at the time. Well, we do the same thing in marriage with our spouse. If you feel like your spouse is coming at you and attacking you or starting some kind of issue, there's a tendency for this fear or flight response to take over. And so if you're the fight or flight response to take over because of the fear. So if you're a fight person, that's going to be arguments and conflict and yelling. Clearly not helpful for any relationship. And if you're a flight person, that's going to be the more, I'm going to run away. I'm not even going to share what's bothering me. I'm going to keep it to myself because if I share this with you, I don't know what's going to happen. And neither of those are productive for helping a relationship. So instead, we have to act in a place of trust and love and making sure that what we believe about our spouse is actually based in reality. So the way that you see your spouse and the way that you choose to look at them in any situation or in any conflict greatly impacts the way that you guys are going to connect as a couple. So if I'm afraid of you, I'm clearly not going to have a safe relationship with you. I'm not going to be able to communicate about anything that bothers me because if I do, there's that fear of what's going to happen to me as a response. So part of working on the correct communication and making sure that you're bringing up difficult conversations is to sit in that place of knowing my spouse really does love me. We want to work together as a team. And so anything we bring up, the whole idea behind this is anything we bring up, we actually both would want to work on because we are in relationship with one another. So if you have trust and love in your relationship, and if you're sitting in that place of believing that to be your reality, these conversations are going to start going better. So 1 John 4:18 says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. So if you have found that you're having a tough time starting these conversations with your spouse and you're wanting to learn how to do that more fully, I want to really encourage you to first sit in that place of knowing that you're loved by God and that your spouse is loved by God as well. And so get into that place where you're practicing thinking about that loving relationship first before you even start a conversation. And part of what you need to do is also show your spouse that they're loved anytime you're bringing up a tough conversation. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. We also want to make sure when we're talking that we're not bringing something up out of anger. So if your spouse has done something that has upset you and you're immediately going to talk about it, I would still encourage you to take a deep breath first before you bring up anything that's problematic, because you've got to make sure that you're in a place where your emotions are low and stable enough that you can have that conversation with your spouse. So James 1:19-20 says, "This you know, my beloved brethren, everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." I am a big fan of marriage, and I believe it was Gary Chapman was the first one to really start talking about marriage being a place to make us holy. Paul David Tripp talks about it as well. So we have this expectation that God has of us in our marriages is to unite us, to teach us to be more like him, really. And there's probably no better place than marriage to learn how to do that, because these things just kind of spill out of us when we get married. We see the areas that we need to grow and we need to change. And that's not because of a spouse pointing it out, but it just becomes really relevant. You know if you're prideful because of the way that you interact with your spouse. You know if you've got an anger issue because of the way you interact with your spouse. You know if your priorities aren't in check because of that same experience of how you're communicating and interacting. So we've got to learn when we're having these conversations that part of what's happening is we're in a place where we're being sanctified, and God is teaching us a little bit more about ourselves in that process. And so as you're coming to a conversation, kind of check yourself first and make sure, is what I'm upset about, is what I'm angry about, something that's actually an internal issue that I need to deal with and something I need to work on. All right, and then the other way that conversation can really go astray when you're trying to have these kinds of communication and discussion with your spouse would be having really bad timing. So my husband and I, when we first started learning to have these maybe harder conversations, we're both pretty bad about excuse me, we're both pretty bad about having the proper timing for those conversations. Timing is everything. So if you've ever wanted to build a business, or if you've ever looked at leadership books, they talk about location, location, location for where you decide to build. It's the same thing for timing. It's timing, timing, timing when it comes to having these difficult conversations with your spouse. So you want to make sure that if you're going to have a tough conversation, that you're having a conversation, first of all, when you have plenty of time to actually have that conversation and end it in a healthy way, and that you're also making sure that there's not other things that are going to get in the way. Cell phones going off, that you're not going to have to walk into church in just a few minutes from the car. These sorts of things. We want to make sure that you have good timing when it comes the time to bring up a conversation like this. Okay, so that's some of the bad ways, right? So we want to make sure that you're not having a harsh startup, so no criticism, no critique when you're needing to bring something up. We want to make sure that your emotions are even keeled and balanced, that you're not feeling incredibly emotional when you bring something up. And we want to make sure you don't have bad timing. Those are the don't do this. Now let's talk a little about what you should do and what'll be helpful. So I already told you no harsh startups. Well, the point is actually to have a really soft startup. So Ephesians 4:29 tells us, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up, as fits the occasion, so it may give grace to those who hear. Now, this does not mean that we can't share a concern in marriage, or we can't share a complaint we have that needs to be dealt with. In fact, one of the most loving things that you can do for your spouse and for your connection is to speak the truth and love to them. So that means if there's something that's coming between you, if there's something that's causing a gap, if there's something that is making you doubt your marriage or feel like you're not connecting, you absolutely should talk about these things. But when you do, you talk about it in a way where you're not criticizing your spouse. So let's say, I think I talked about house cleaning a while ago. Let's say that you really want your spouse to be more involved in that task. They haven't been involved in the task, and maybe you've even asked about this before, but they're still not helping out. So what you want to do is start softly. one of the ways to start softly is to talk a little bit about what you do appreciate about your spouse. So we'll just say a scenario is your spouse has been working more often. Maybe they're getting overtime. They're not as involved in the house chores, and it has really been frustrating you. You might start with a soft startup by saying, hey, sweetie, thank you so much that you work so hard for me. I appreciate that. I recognize that, and I know that you're really busy. So that's a soft startup. It's letting them know that you do see things that they do well and you appreciate that about it. And then you can come in with what you're actually needing. So I really need some more help around the house. Do you think maybe you could help me do dishes one night a week? Or do you think you could clean the bathroom every other Saturday? So you can kind of ask for what you need in those moments. We just want to make sure it's not because you're following a criticism. Instead, follow a compliment. Not something that's a lie, okay? So no manipulation involved, but follow it with something that is true and something you do appreciate about your marriage. Y'all, I have been battling a cough for like a week, so I'm sorry if I can't get words out today or if I start having a coughing fit. All right, number 2, remind your spouse that you guys are on a team. So part of what you're trying to do anytime you have a difficult conversation is what you're really doing is sharing your heart, okay? So this isn't about behaviors necessarily that have been a problem, and you're not actually upset about those behaviors typically. What it really is that's disconnect that you feel. So you may feel like you're not being cared for. You may feel like your spouse isn't showing you they love you. You may feel like your spouse doesn't appreciate how hard you work. Like those are the things that we need to figure out and get to when you're wanting more help. That's part of sharing your heart with your spouse. So instead of saying, I need you to do this, this, and this, what you're really saying is, I want us to be connected. This is going to help me feel closer to you. This is going to make me feel like you love me. And so I'm asking you to do this particular task or play this role in our marriage. So keep that in mind. You definitely want to show that it's more about the connection and the heart than it is about some type of behavior that's done. In fact, I just thought of an example. So I've had couples tell me before when one spouse is saying, and I think house chores, because that's just one so many people deal with, but I've had a couple tell me before that so the wife is saying, I've got all these chores and responsibilities in the home. I really need help from my husband. And I remember one husband actually suggesting, hey, why don't we get a house cleaner to help you with that, and that'll take that off your plate. And the wife actually hated that idea, and she thought, why would we get a house cleaner? You've got time to do this. I need you to do it. And it seemed like a control issue, but the reality is, as we talked more, what she was saying is, this is one way you show me you value me. This is a way you show me you care about me and you care about my heart, is you come into our home and you play an active role and you take that responsibility. You see, it wasn't necessarily the house being dirty even. It was that I need to be connected to you, and I want to know that you want to be connected to me as well. That's what I'm talking about when I say heart issue. Figure out what is the problem behind this difficult topic I need to bring up, what's going on inside of me, and how do I express that to my spouse in a way where they get it and they hear me and they understand. Okay, and then finally, we want to make sure, and I kind of hit on this a second ago, but we want to make sure that we're speaking the truth in love anytime we need to have a conversation with our spouse. So it is important that we speak truth, and it's important that we do it in a way that's kind and gentle toward one another. It's never loving to name call. It's never loving to point out these huge weaknesses in your spouse and let them know where they need to change. But it is loving and pretty Christ-like to be able to say, hey, this is an area that causes us pain and causes our relationship to crumble a little bit. And so I want this area worked on, and I want us to feel safe and connected. That's speaking the truth in love. So John 13:34 says, a new command I give you, that you love one another. Just as I loved you, you're to love one another. And you know, we can really take a beautiful example from Christ, because he would often tell people where they needed to change. And he was pretty gentle in the way he did it, except for with the highly religious people that actually needed to be spoken to more harshly. But he would come into others, and he would have these conversations, and he would spend time with them, and he would let them know, I'm here because I care about you. I think about the woman at the well often, and it's such a beautiful story because she comes in probably, at least the way I've always heard theologians talk about it, is she's coming in the middle of the day. She knows she's not going to be talked to. She knows that nobody's going to have to talk to her about her story. She's got that privacy, and she comes in and runs into Jesus instead, and he lets her know, I do know you. I know the areas where you ain't got things together. So she speaks of not having a husband, and he says, I know you don't have a husband. You've had 7, and the one you have now isn't your husband. But he says it in a way where she says, I want to know more. Who is this man that knows everything about me? And when we can take that and bring that into our marriage and sit with our spouse and say, yeah, I know this is an issue. I know this is a hard place for you. I know this is a place that brings up tension, but we can do it in a way where we're saying, but I see you and I love you and I'm having this conversation because I want more and I want to be close and connected to you. That's what's going to help in your communication. And that's what's going to help you avoid the conflict that so often comes when you do need to speak the truth in love. All right, so here's why these talks aren't just as simple as gaining a few skills. Like I've given you a couple of tips, right? So we look at timing, we look at the way we start the conversation, we make sure we're trying to connect heart to heart. Like I've given you some of those tips, and honestly, I could probably talk for an hour giving you specific skills. You can read those in all kinds of books, how to actually have the skill level to talk in a way that's going to bring conflict resolution to your marriage and healthy communication. But the reality is this does become somewhat difficult because communication is not just on you. It's on your spouse as well. So part of what's happening anytime you have a conversation is it matters how your spouse responds to you. I've tried to talk about some of this before too, saying, if you need to have a conversation with your spouse and let them know that you need more connection from them and they're not hearing it, then here are some ways you can do that and share your heart. But the reality is every time I'm saying it takes 2 and it takes both of you working on your relationship, the reason I say that is because even if you talk very eloquently, even if you share your heart, even if you wait for perfect timing, even if you make sure your words are dripping with love and that you're saying it in a way that's helpful, your spouse could still take insult, and your spouse may still take it as really is much uglier than you mean it, and you may still find that disconnect. So the reason why sometimes these little communication skills don't work is because it does matter how your spouse responds. Now, I would encourage you, if you've been bringing up a particular subject or a difficulty or a problem that you've wanted your spouse to work on and they're not working on it, I would encourage you not to belabor the point. Doesn't mean it's not important, but I do know that it can cause a lot of issues when we keep asking the same thing over and over again. In fact, I didn't look it up because I wasn't going to include it, but Proverbs talks about the nagging wife being like a dripping faucet. And that's not just women, that's men too. If there's this constant do this, 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 people can only take so much of it. So in marriage, it's not helpful to keep bringing up the same issue and over again. In fact, this is when you need to bring somebody else in to help you in your relationship. So Proverbs 10:19 says, when words are many, transgressions are not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent. So again, if we're speaking about something over and over again, and we're not seeing a lot of change, it's actually not helpful to keep speaking about it over and over again. This is when you bring help in, and this is when you might decide, let's get on a call with Dr. Jessica. But this is the time when you have to decide to let somebody help you, maybe a pastor, maybe a mentor, but you've got to make sure that you're not having these conversations by yourself over and over again if they haven't been fruitful. Because the reality is, if you guys cannot come together and talk about these things, that's not going to change just because you try to use the right timing and you try to speak gently. All right, so here's some practical tips. If you're going to look for help, you need to make sure that you are using a proven biblical strategy. Don't just go by what the world says, because guys, the world is wrong quite often in a variety of contexts. And especially when we're talking marriage and intimacy, the world can lead you astray. So make sure that you're using a proven biblical strategy. Get you an experienced guide, somebody who knows what they're doing and wants to help you, someone who's fighting for your marriage with you. Nobody's going to care like you do. That's just the reality, because you're the one inside of the relationship. But find someone that'll walk alongside you and motivate you and push you to have an excellent marriage and connection. If you choose to call me, just know that I can't help you with the tenacity or the perseverance part. I can't help you be resourceful. I can't help you get into a spirit of being taught well or being willing to hear and be teachable. All of that you would have to bring to the table. But if you want to bring that to the table and you're ready to transform your marriage, your communication, your conflict resolution, and your intimacy, it just might be a good time to give me a call. You can do that by scheduling a call. The link is right there in the description of the video, but you can do that at befullywell.com/apply. And if you do that, we're going to get on the phone for about an hour. Just make sure that if you do this, that you're not going to get on the phone and blame your spouse for the things that they're doing incorrectly or doing wrong. That's not going to be helpful. And make sure that your spouse is going to be there too, because the reality, again, it takes two to work on the relationship. I can't help you work on your relationship if you're not both wanting to be a part of this and be involved. So if you're willing to be humble and teachable, and if you're ready to do whatever it takes to change your relationship, and you're ready to let the Bible be your source of working on your relationship, not your feelings, then hop on a call with me. That's befullywell.com/apply. And I look forward to connecting with you. So until next week, guys, enjoy your weekend, have a date night, and God bless you, your marriage, and your intimacy. Bye.